There's a few things in life that just about everyone can agree on. You need food and water to live, for example. Air is also nice. But even beyond basic needs that I'm only listing because I couldn't think of a better opening, there's plenty of other things everyone can agree would probably be good. Having a lot of money, for example. To be sure, there's a certain...
I mean, everybody needs money, especially in this materialistic world. That being said, can't Gelt just make gold? Wouldn't that completely destroy any economy that he's in?
Certain point where money stops buying happiness for people, but I can also be sure most people wouldn't say no to being handed $1 million with no strings attached. Some monks in the mountains, maybe, but your average person is grabbing that suitcase full of cash in the blink of an eye. Or how about being magical? Look me in the eyes and tell me that if someone said you could become a powerful mage, you would say no. No one would say no to that because everyone wants...
I think it would be stupid to let down that kind of opportunity. It's something that nobody else will ever experience, probably, so why not? That being said, there are obviously some things out there that you don't want to try. It's not, you know, try everything just a little.
Wants to be a wizard. Even you, person who's gonna LARP in the comments and call magic dishonorable, magic is great. Wave your hands and cast a cool spell. It'd be fantastic. Just imagine prestidigitation in your everyday life. You would never need to clean your house again. But what if those things fed into each other? What if your powerful magic could make you a richer person? And what if all your money allowed you to get things to become an even more powerful wizard? Wouldn't that be something special? Well, in the world of Warhammer Fantasy, we've got a character who's just that. Balthasar Gelt. He's rich, he's powerful, he's a wizard extraordinaire. In fact, in the Empire of Man, I'd go so far as to say he's the wizard. Though there may be some more powerful than he, there's no one who can control the lore of metal quite like he does. So get comfortable.
Every single time. I can't get over it. Whenever lore of metal gets mentioned, I can hear it being said in Gelt's voice. It's probably also because in a lot of Mandalore videos, he also uses that soundbite whenever it's appropriate. This man's power to meme is honestly unrivaled. Unless if, maybe I'm just forgetting another character in the Warhammer universe that has more memes than this guy.
And listen about the man who used his mighty gifts of the arcane to scam taxi drivers out of $50. But before we talk about golden wizards, hello. You can see my lovely face here because I'm here to talk to you about something near and dear to me. Cereal. More specifically, Magic Spoon, the sponsor of this video. How about I just cut to the chase? I love cereal, but cereal doesn't love me.
Who doesn't?
Because eating it tends to send my blood sugar into the stratosphere. But Magic Spoon is here with one hell of a nutritional label for me. 0 grams of sugar and 4 to 5 net grams of carbs per serving. That saves my poor old pancreas quite a bit of trouble. And if you have any sort of restrictions on sugar or carb intake, it'll be just as good for you. 13 to 14 grams of protein per serving too, so it can even help you pack on some muscle. But how about the taste? Again, just getting straight to the point, it's great. Fruity, cocoa, frosted, peanut butter, and plenty more, all available to suit whatever tastes you have. And I like all of them. I like frosted the most, because anything that tastes even remotely like icing to me is gonna be my favorite, but they're all plenty tasty. As proof, here's me devouring some. I don't know about you, but I can't think of a better recommendation for food than eating it. And if you're interested in getting some Magic Spoon, which you should be, it's good eating, I've got a deal for you. Use my code Pancreas or click my link in the description to get $5 off your Magic Spoon order. If you prefer real-life shopping, you can find it in your local grocery store. They're so confident you'll like it that there's a 100% happiness guarantee online. If you don't like it, you'll get a refund. No questions asked. So click the link in the description.
Really?
MagicSpoon.com/pan.
I mean, how does that work? Can't you just, like, order one, say that you don't like it, and just get a free meal? There's probably some sort of terms and conditions on that.
For $5 off, and get yourself some Magic Spoon today. Now then, funny gold mask man. Balthasar Gelt doesn't exactly come from the most noble and exciting of fantasy origins, but he does come from a position that lends credence as to how he was able to gain the position he eventually would. He was the son of someone who was not only a phenomenal apothecary, but the doctor of a noble house.
I was wondering why we brought Apothecary Diaries into this. Not that I watched the show, but I had heard that it was pretty good.
The Border Princess. So while not exactly coming from a long line of kings or heroes, he came from a reasonably wealthy family that could afford him chances to look into more untraditional careers, as it were.
Okay.
Indeed, he appeared to be quite talented at creating medicine, doing far better than even those with decades of experience on him.
Really?
He also had an almost instinctual grasp on the properties of various minerals and herbs, like a somewhat less full of himself Dr. House. His true passion, however, was alchemy, presumably using the wealth.
Oh my god. That's so dirty. Of course Pancreas would put that picture from Full Metal Alchemist. Never forget, man. Actually, I think this was something that was brought up when we had moved Gelt's starting position all the way over to Cathay, where the Cathay brother could potentially have a very interesting conversation with Gelt when it comes to alchemy, because that's kind of his whole thing too. Plus, I think he also uses lower metal, right? I haven't played any of the Cathay factions yet in Total War, but I think that's right.
Both his family and his own works had given him, he was able to travel the world and study under the most intelligent people the lands had to offer. Tylea, Araby, Estalia, beyond. Everywhere he went, he would not only learn everything his teachers had to teach, but almost always he'd end up being able to teach them a thing or two. By the time he finally came to the colleges of magic in Altdorf, he was admitted into it with absolutely no questions asked. He was just that damn good. Except everything before that bit was very possibly just a lie. Gelt's fooled all of you. Because while it's true he was admitted without a formal apprenticeship due to his impressive skill, no one actually knows where he comes from or what his backstory is. He certainly isn't being upfront about it, and any investigations that have been conducted to explain who the hell the Magic Metal Man is have come up short. They do
Interesting. I remember talking about this during another reaction. It was one of Mandalore's videos, I think, about how sometimes it's better to just leave things mysterious, like leave an unknown gray area when it comes to a character's backstory, or honestly just lore for a fictional universe in general, because it helps drives intrigue and creates fan theories, and it could also be used as a tool to tell a story in the future. So while it is nice that there are some universes out there and some characters who, you know, like the very beginning of, like where they were born and how they grew up, I think throwing in a mix of characters who you just don't know, like what exactly their deal is, into your story makes it more intriguing and more interesting.
Occasionally find people who have dealt with him before, but whenever they bring him up, the conversation abruptly stops. Maybe he's threatening them, or maybe that previous story has some truth and they're embarrassed he showed him up. For all we know, he put a curse on everyone who's talked to him, so that they explain who he is, they turn into gold on the spot. We do at least know how he arrived in Altdorf.
I mean, that could be possible considering how powerful of a mage he is. Gelt is just the guy you can never speak of, even if you know anything about him. It's kind of the best way to keep your own privacy. But I suppose for him, it's not really just about like privacy or secrecy. It's for his own safety as well, because there are forces in the Warhammer Fantasy universe that could do a lot with just a little bit of information about someone. I can't give any specific examples, but I think you guys know what I'm talking about. Best to not show any kind of weakness.
He came on a merchant ship from Marienburg after paying for it with solid gold bars, which days after arriving in Altdorf turned into solid lead bars. The ship captain put a bounty on Gelt's head for fooling him like that, and to my knowledge, it's still there to this day. Jumping ahead a bit, this means the holder of one of the highest positions in the entire Empire of Man has a bounty on his head. And no, no one has tried to claim it yet. Or at least if anyone has, we don't hear from them anymore.
Yeah, no shit. Oh man. That is not a bounty that any sane person would take, and those who are crazy enough to attempt it probably aren't the ones powerful enough to even succeed at that kind of attempt. Does that mean most of the soldiers under his command just kind of go according to orders and don't question it too much? I wonder what kind of man Gelt is and how he treats his people.
It should be noted that at least from everything I know about the guy, he didn't need to do that. Whether or not he does come from a somewhat wealthy family, he's an incredibly powerful metal wizard and can turn things into gold permanently. Even ignoring that, he absolutely could have made some money with his own talents and skills. As far as I can tell, he just scammed that captain for the love of the game. Upon becoming a licensed Imperial...
Yo, once again, this fam is just memeing on people. Haha, like, got you. Maybe he laughs about it at night before he goes to sleep. He just keeps all of those little jokes and pranks that he pulled in his little jar that he pulls them out whenever he's feeling down.
Wizard, though, he didn't just sit around and enjoy all the perks that gives. However much of his backstory is true or not, his passion for alchemy and the lore of metal undoubtedly is. He would set to work in the College of Metal's workshops and labs with a fervor unmatched by anyone else, and his enthusiasm for both learning and teaching apparently made him a popular figure in the lecture halls. And honestly, who wouldn't want to be taught by Gelt? Within a decade, he'd become the patriarch of the Metal College, taking the position from the previous one, Magdalena Althaus. Minor fun lore fact, they're called the Supreme Matriarch if they're a woman. He even gained quite a few friends amongst Imperial engineers. Alchemy in fantasy settings tends to be equal parts science and magic, and Gelt respected both fields. He was in particular interested in finding out new and better formulas for gunpowder, and his respect for material science made sure that the Imperial Gunnery School was happy whenever Gelt came around, even though they usually aren't too fond of wizard crap.
I mean, when it comes to the Empire's artillery, they're doing very, very good work there. Like, not even considering the Amethyst units that were introduced with Thrones of Decay. Just the regular artillery is very good because it's probably a mix of human plus dwarf and plus probably all this lore metal stuff. And I mean, thank goodness humans at least have that advantage, or else we wouldn't have a chance at all in the fantasy universe.
Maybe he should have been a bit more careful with some of those experiments, though, because one day something went rather explosively wrong. The specifics of what exactly happened, like many things about Gelt, are a mystery. Truth be told, it could have been any number of things. Messing around with gunpowder is asking for trouble at the best of times. The same can be said for magic in this setting, and Gelt, being a lore of metal wizard, had bravely devoted his life to digging around with the dangerous parts of both reality and unreality. For all we know, that ship captain that put a bounty on his head got his revenge and snuck a bomb in or something. We don't even know how he came out of this whole affair. Is he horribly disfigured, or is the skin beneath his golden mask now the purest living gold? We don't know and never will, because Gelt refuses to take it off. That second option would be incredibly funny, though, given the Tomb King's existence and Cetra's demand prior to his death. Turns out living gold bodies are easy as hell to obtain. Just
That would be kind of funny if Cetra just sees that and is like, wait, bro. I do want to add that I completely forgot about this aspect about Gelt's character, but yeah, he's a masked character. Obviously, the masked character would have a ambiguous backstory. It just fits his whole design.
Blow yourself up. That may be the reason he hides behind the mask, actually. If he really did have golden skin and Cetra found out, the Empire of Man would be crawling in Tomb Kings until they kidnapped him and forced him to recreate what happened. This accident wasn't the wake-up call to either calm down or find a new profession, as it probably should have been. Gelt, if anything, renewed his studies with more interest than ever before. One fateful day, he even managed to become the Supreme Patriarch, a fact which he lets you know every other time you select him in Total War. Every 8 years, you see, the colleges of magic would come together to decide the next one. A contest is held which involves the current Supreme Patriarch and the representatives of the other 7 orders entering what's known as the Obsidian Hall. Obsidian apparently dampens magic, which is especially important here because the contest is a magical duel that's over when one of the 2 contestants grabs the...
I wonder why obsidian dampens magic. Does it somehow have some sort of property that halts the winds of magic, so it just becomes more difficult to utilize that?
The Staff of Volans that rests in the center of the hall. It isn't strictly speaking to the death, and in fact that's generally frowned upon, but one of the lores of magic in this setting is the lore of death magic. It happens sometimes. The incumbent then faces the challengers one at a time until there's either a new Supreme Patriarch or the current one gets to keep their job for another 8 years. Gelt won this contest, becoming the new Supreme Patriarch after beating Thyrus Gorman, a lore of fire wizard who, on an unrelated note, is built like a goddamn freight train. Ever since, he's largely continued on as he has, only with more power at his commands, both politically and literally. In fact, just to show you how serious I am, I'm going to compare him favorably to the elves. Balthasar Gelt, being human, might not be the most powerful wizard in the setting. Teclis, Mazdamundi, Marathi, and a few others are undoubtedly able to overpower him. But in mastery of the winds of metal particularly, he is unrivaled. Not a single being alive knows the winds of metal as well as he does. In fact, assuming we take his potential backstory as true, that would explain why he was so talented with minerals and herbs. One of the spells of the lore of metal is Breach the Unknown, and it tells you everything about an object, from its chemical composition to any magical properties it might have.
I mean, that would be incredibly useful for any aspiring alchemist. I do also think that's a good way to make your character powerful, but not like overly powerful that they become an anomaly when it comes to just the human characters. Like, yeah, he's the best at the lore of metal, but there are certainly other people who can match him or outperform him because they were specifically, created to excel in those kinds of in the Winds of Magic.
He could have been unconsciously using that spell as a kid. There was one battle known as the Slaughter at the Six Spikes where he more or less single-handedly turned the tide of battle. Truth be told, most of it isn't terribly important. It was the Beastmen using the aforementioned Six Spikes, which as it turns out were magical rocks to bring ruin to the realms of man and all that jazz. The very shaman in charge of the Beastmen horde was casting fell magics and making a terrible storm. There were great and terrible beasts such as gorgons and minotaurs, and all kinds of stuff I'm sure is terribly frightening in universe. Out of universe, we know the Beastmen never amount to anything, so it's kind of hard to care, to be honest. The Empire apparently sent...
I mean, yeah, the Beastmen, they're a faction, they're a playable faction, they have some pretty powerful characters, and I think they're just fun in general to play, from what I've heard in Total War. But in lore, they're not really... I mean, they're a part of it, but they're not really a major player. At least from the general broad perspective of my understanding of how the Warhammer Fantasy story goes.
Warnings regarding this threat in part with mechanical pigeons though, so that's neat. I'm sorry, being dismissive of the Beastmen is so ingrained in Warhammer, I can't help myself. Even in Total War, facing them is more inconvenient than threatening half the time, with the singular exception of Franz's early campaign where they glass Middenheim as often as not. To be fair to them...
I mean... yeah, there is that. Also, if you play Ikit Claw, in Skaven Blight, you most certainly don't want to be heading to the left when you're doing your early campaign, because you're gonna run into an issue. The Beastmen can be very powerful if they get going, but for the most part, I haven't really seen any AI completely dominate. And I think I've seen people talk about how if you play as Taurox, you can pretty much win your entire campaign in like 1 or 2 turns, if you get lucky.
The Empire force was led by Kurt Helborg, head of the Reichsguard and all-around cool dude. If he's being brought to the fight, it can't be a small incursion, and even with both constant casualties inflicted on the Beastman and his magnificent mustache, the Empire was being pushed back. No cannon shots could harm any of the spikes, and it looked like without something decisive happening, man would lose to beast. Then Balthasar Gelt came riding in on his Pegasus Quicksilver with reinforcements. Reinforcements, I should add, that consisted of the entirety of the Imperial Zoo in Altdorf. He just bound them to his will and threw them into battle. I haven't the slightest idea how he did this, because unless I'm missing something, the lore of metal doesn't have any spells that let him do that. This included the dragon that the Empire keeps, by the way. Gelt is just built different to your average person. Since Gelt is a smart lad, he knew that even with his literal menagerie of reinforcements, he couldn't quite turn the tide if he just landed in the middle of the battlefield. So he took his beasts, jumped the Bray Shaman and his assistants atop the 6 spikes, and either had them turned to gold or ripped apart. Wizards got rid of, he then turned most of the rest of the Beastman army into gold. It's said that not a single one managed to escape, which is in all honesty an incredibly impressive feat. They're damn fast, but Gelt and Quicksilver were apparently faster. Worth mentioning is that while Gelt isn't directly involved in every single instance of a wizard doing something in the Empire, he is the Supreme Patriarch. Nothing important is going to go on amongst the mages of man without his knowledge of it in some way. Given that, you can safely assume some level of involvement on Balthasar Gelt's part in anything sufficiently magical that occurs in most books that happen in what was Warhammer Fantasy's modern setting. Oh, there's also another time Gelt pulled the old gold is actually lead trick, although this time he actually turned real gold into lead, so it was sort of reversed. The Elector Count of Nordland was being aggressive towards the province of Hawkland. Karl told Gelt to fix it, so Gelt went to Nordland, turned the Count's treasury into lead, and then left. Please be aware, viewer, that this is not the last time he does this. Running through to the end times, and Gelt has some moments, to be sure.
Oh god, now we're getting into end times territory. Poor guy got stabbed when he was trying to save mankind. I think that was also the moment where if he had successfully done that, we probably would have won. But yeah, Manfred had to exist.
As much fairness as one can possibly give the end times, which is not much in brutal honesty, the big moment Gelt is known for only comes at the end. Prior to that, he puts in a pretty good showing of things, and a lot of what he does...
Actually, yeah, that is fair. I don't know much of what he does before that, I just know how he dies.
...is at least understandable. Reading what happens to him, I don't get the feeling I do for a lot of other instances in the end times. That feeling naturally being, what the hell are the authors smoking? See, after Volkmar vanished into Sylvania, which would lead him to possibly the worst fate imaginable, Gelt constructed what was known as the Wall of Faith around the entire province. He got the idea from one of his apprentices, which was assisted even further by the delivery of a scroll from a rather odd but ultimately helpful woman. It allowed for faith and magic to be blended almost perfectly, and as long as it was maintained by both mages and priests, the wall would be held strong. Unfortunately,
This is strange. Oddly helpful woman? Who is she?
Fortunately for our man, this was immediately the start of his downfall, because the woman was a vampire working for Neferata, and it was probably that one vampire named Genevieve who has the single longest full name in any Warhammer setting short of Cetra and the knight from Shoota's Blood and Teeth. And his apprentice, or
I don't know who this is, but from what I recall, was it Neferata, right? I think she's part of the Lamia bloodline, where they train for espionage. I think the reason why I learned about them was because it was during the dwarf video, the dwarf stronghold video, where they've taken one of the dwarf strongholds and are using it as their base. Pretty sure. And of course, Changeling. Obviously, he's everywhere. Shows up anywhere.
earlier was actually the Changeling. I believe it was unsaid why the Changeling was giving Gelt away to keep the vampires contained, but there's three likely options. A, this was done to stall Nagash's return as long as possible. B, this was just step one of the naturally convoluted plan to get the Changeling integrated in the Empire to wreak the most amount of havoc possible. Or C, Tzeentch and the Changeling were bored and thought it'd be funny. Tzeentch doesn't really need a reason to scheme over complicated BS like this. It's his whole thing. Gelt, for his part, gained quite a bit of popularity for cordoning off all of Sylvania. Both wanted to keep the Empire safe, and being the kind of person who shouts out, "I am supreme" during a battle, he decided he'd go for gold.
Oh man, I gotta try out Gelt's campaign at some point. Ah, the memes.
And make an even bigger wall. This time it was across the entire Empire of Man's northern border, with a little bit of it protecting part of Kislev. Gotta say, it wasn't subtle, but it was sure as hell effective. Just plonking an entire massive wall across your country's borders in the blink of an eye is certainly a good way to keep demons.
I mean, the wall definitely helped out Cathay, yeah? Well, for a time. I forgot how Cathay's Great Bastion, it's called, I think. How that fell. I think it was a joint effort between the forces of chaos plus the Norskins. Because Wulfric has some sort of ability where he can teleport, right? So I would imagine that would help greatly when you're trying to destroy or scale a wall.
Out, and sure enough, Archaon and his horde couldn't immediately breach their way in. Unfortunately for Gelt, this is the part where he starts realizing he has a lot of issues to deal with. First off, Chaos being the bigger threat meant that the wall around Sylvania had fallen somewhat by the wayside. It was still there, but it wasn't being nearly as maintained as it needed to be given the Auric Bastion coming to existence. Compounding on this is that the Auric Bastion's far larger scale meant little cracks tended to appear here and there, weaknesses that could be taken.
Wait, what is this Auric Bastion?
Advantage of. Not yet catastrophic ones, or at least not ones that an entire horde could swarm through, but cracks were appearing in the wall, segments were weakening. And to top it off, Gelt finally wisened up to the fact that the Changeling was running amok, and he allied with the R. Ulrich Emil Valgir to sniff him out. Because the only thing Gelt loves more than money and power is apparently digging himself deeper into a hole, he also came across Vlad von Karstein. Now look, I understand everyone loves Vlad. I also love Vlad. But in universe, not many people like Vlad. He's a bit of an untrusted figure on account of being a vampire and nearly toppling the Empire.
Yeah.
So when him and Vlad have a chat about the wall and Vlad gives him a tome that teaches him how to do necromancy, what Gelt should have done was burn it. What he did instead was very briefly debate using it, decide it was a necessary evil, and then immediately start raising zombies to defend the Auric Bastion. This led up to a confrontation against the Elector Count of Hochland, who was a little bit pissed about him being a necromancer, which ended in the Elector Count's death, which is just a slight smidgen of treason. Even worse,
a slight smidgen. Oh. Was it really truly necessary in that situation to draw upon powers that obviously would get you branded as a heretic in the Empire? Because I know that there are obviously like mages who are skilled in death magic, but even if they could do that, they would probably avoid showing that at all costs.
First for Gelt was that he discovered that Vultan was to be gifted Galmaraz itself, being the pseudo-incarnation of Sigmar and all that. Problem here is that he had learned that Vultan was almost certainly the Changeling, and handing over the symbol of the Empire and Warhammer itself to a Tzeentch demon was not a good outcome. So naturally, he went to go rescue Galmaraz and Karl from the Changeling's evil clutches. And then when his desperate argument that more or less amounted to "please trust me, Mr. Emperor, he's for real a bad guy" didn't work, he just gave up and started summoning zombies to try and kill Vultan with. Shocker, not only does this not work because Kurt Helborg held him off, but Vultan wasn't even the Changeling. It was the Ulrich. This was promptly dealt with.
Oh my god. This fucking Changeling, man. Oh, when you think you finally have him, you don't. He's like 10 steps ahead. What a guy.
But by this point, Gelt had lost any semblance of faith in himself and wandered off to be one of Vlad's many hanger-ons, since he clearly couldn't handle independence. Worse off for the Empire than just losing its supreme patriarch was losing the Ulrich Bastion. Because it was supported by wizards and priests, it needed a constant stream of both faith and magic to keep it going.
Oh, no. Okay, I guess the Ulrich Bastion is the name of the wall that he erected over at Sylvania.
And when it turns out the guy who created it was a necromancer that tried to kill the dude who was probably your main god reborn, no one was exactly feeling the Ulrich Bastion anymore.
Yeah.
Whether or not this was Tzeentch's ultimate plan or if it was just a happy consolation prize instead of Galmaraz, I'll leave for you to decide. But at the end of the day, the wall came down and Chaos can now invade the Empire properly. He and Vlad for their part create one hell of an undead army to fight Chaos with, and at Everheim he eventually manages to have another moral compass turnaround and binds himself to the winds of Shamon, purging the dark arts of necromancy from his mind. Funnily enough though, he isn't done agreeing with evil bastards, because he and Malekith are the only ones who say that Nagash isn't someone the incarnates of the winds of magic should ally with. On the one hand, Balthasar Gelt probably doesn't have any room to be arguing against necromancy after the shit he pulled, but on the other hand, he does have experience on why it's a bad idea. Also, Nagash. I get it, come Age of Sigmar, I'm Nagash's #1 fan, but we're still in fantasy here. Do not trust this man. You can't even say that with a straight face. This isn't a man. This is a god. This is Nagash. Trusting him is worse than trusting Tzeentch, because you can probably see Tzeentch's betrayal coming a mile away. But they do, and then it's off to try and pull one final ritual to save the world. And man, you know how it goes. It's never fun talking about the end of the end times, but because Gelt is very involved in the big event, I kinda feel obligated. You know what makes everything even worse, though? In the ritual the Incarnates were gonna cast to stave off the end of the world, they had more or less retaken Middenheim. I mean, sure, not completely. For example, Sigmar and Archaon were still wrestling over the big hammer somewhere, but they were able to start casting an incredibly magic and focus-intense ritual to save the world. You can't do that in the middle of a battlefield, because otherwise you'd be getting stabbed. And sure enough, the Incarnates weren't doing it in the middle of the battlefield, at least enough of it was moved away so all their respective armies could hold off chaos while the big names did the ritual. And then
yeah, so from my understanding here, there were small victories every now and then, and during that one glimmer of hope, this betrayal happened, which is why Manfred's name is kind of just stuck in everyone's mind.
And Balthasar Gelt made the assumption that he wasn't going to be stabbed in the back while he was saving the world by a vampire who was only doing it to spite his father one last time. Thank you, Manfred. Whenever someone brings up who's worse, Manfred or Erebus, it's an easy answer. Erebus gave us 40k. Manfred removed the amount of Warhammer that exists in the universe because he wasn't...
Okay, actually, you know what, Pancreas? You have a point. Erebus gave us 40k. Manfred destroyed fantasy. Those are not equal. I mean, I still hate Erebus, but I can't hate him for that. Can't hate him the same way that you hate Manfred. And you sure can't love him like Kiwi. You have to be a deranged psychopath in order to love him like Kiwi.
Involved in any way in Age of Sigmar's birth when it comes to in-universe actions taken. Not intentionally, at least. He had no idea the Mortal Realms would come about. He just wanted to spite Vlad, so he stabbed Gelt in the back. With that, unfortunately, the tale of Balthasar Gelt ends here. A great, if by no means unselfish hero who died trying his best to save the world. Even if he only did it...
I mean, there isn't really any reincarnation of Gelt in Age of Sigmar, right? Or is there any character that is like a parallel to Gelt there?
So he could continue to accrue money and power? Hard to argue with someone trying to save the world no matter their motives. So on a completely unrelated note, let's talk about this Balthas fellow. He's a Stormcast Eternal who has a strange idea that the world that was is where he's originally from in some regard.
Well, Never mind. Well, my question got immediately answered. Okay, who is this guy who looks like him? Shares the same name.
He's so talented in the lore of metal that it's as if Shamon recognized him somehow. He's met Nagash, who outright said he was looking forward to having him under his thumb again, and he has a mount named Quicksilver. He also rarely, if ever, takes off his golden face mask. Golly gee willikers, guys, who could this fella be? Did you know Arum is the Latin word for gold? Could be anyone, this guy, truly. Our reborn as a superhero friend may not know who he truly is, but we do, and enough important people do as well that I wouldn't be surprised if Sigmar specifically sought his soul out. Temporary traitor or not, he nearly saved the world when push came to shove. And he continued being the little scammer we know and love, only now at the level of a demigod of war. Remember that business with the Elector Count of Nordland? Well, this time, there was once a city that was rebelling against Sigmar. It was phenomenally wealthy, and as a result had gathered quite the mercenary army to keep itself safe. This would have been a war that while Sigmar's forces would surely win, would cause no small amount of casualties for even the Stormcast Eternals.
For sure.
So Balthasar Gelt, who had no idea this is the second time he pulled this stunt, flew into the city, turned their massive stored amounts of gold into granite, and because no one was paying them anymore, the mercenaries just left. Naturally, the city also surrendered, and likely had to face the mother of all economic crises in the aftermath. Also, please be aware that a good portion of his motivation for this was that the city had some stuff in it he wanted for his research. So he threw...
Oh, I mean, of course. Yeah, from all the descriptions of Gelt, he's that kind of guy who would do the right thing for his own reasons. There's gotta be something in it for him. And I'm sure when Carl asked him to deal with that whole diplomatic situation, to turn all that gold into lead in the first place, he probably had to have some sort of leverage to help him.
The entire thing into an economic recession. He features in the book Soul Wars, which I won't really go through, but it's a good read. I will go through the short story The Library of Forgotten Moments, though, because aside from being about his quest to discover who he was, it also has some glorious payback. The story, sure enough, begins with Gelt seeking the Library of Forgotten Moments. He's a Lord Arcanum now, and by his own words, their chief goal above all others is to fix the reforging process of the Stormcast Eternals. But also by his own admission, he's got some more selfish motives. He needs to learn who he was. He has to. He more or less outright says that even if what he learns brings him to madness, it'll at least put him further on some sort of path. There's also a pretty interesting moment where his mount, Quicksilver 2.0, goes at what appears to be light speed. Not important, but damn cool. He reaches the library with what seems to be little fanfare, all things considered, and is granted access by its undead caretakers. This is all in Shyish, by the by, since where else would a library about a dead world be but the land of the dead? And as he goes deep into the library, he finds a book in a language not from the mortal realms, but one he for some reason knows is familiar to him.
Wait, a quick refresher. Shyish is one of the realms of the dead. It's not the realm of the dead, right? Because there are others, and I think it kind of depends on the race, as well as whatever kind of bound spell some people might have. But from what I recall, I think Nagash gained control of Shyish, but it's not like all of the dead go to him. I think it was something along those lines when we learned about the end times, but yeah.
He reads a single word, Alcahest, and gets a flashback to the old fantasy world. And do you want to guess what his first vision of his past life was? What great and overwhelming mystery he saw unraveled?
Him
the
getting
motherfucker's
stabbed?
first vision of his past life from a period of time so long ago age no longer has meaning was him scamming the poor ship captain with fake gold.
Oh man, that was such a good moment. It just had to be immortalized forever.
He's so committed to the bit that scamming people is embedded in his soul. Shortly after he comes into contact with a vampire, or rather, the vampire in Age of Sigmar, Manny von Kari himself. They get into a bit of a duel, are interrupted by the undead keepers of the library, and are both escorted to the prized possession of the library. Without spoiling what it is, both because it's a good story you should read for yourself, and because it's a short one, so I'd just be spoiling the whole damn thing, what they find is quite related to the old world. They also both recognize each other, although neither of them can really place what their relationship used to be. Manfred is Manfred, so they start fighting again, and Gelt shows that while he may not be the strongest wizard around, he's damn smart. and also a Stormcast now, so he can throw hands physically when need be too. The story ends with Gelt on the cusp of potentially learning who he once was, and only time and future book releases will tell if he truly finds out here. Now with all that said and done, Gelt to my knowledge has no special rules on the tabletop. He's had quite the honors in his stories, having spoken with Sigmar himself and surviving an encounter with Nagash, but no rules, which is a shame. I can honestly understand him not getting a model because he always wears the mask, so you can just call a Lord Arcanum Gelt and be happy with it, but some rules would be appreciated. He's also not in the old world either, slightly more understandably though, because this is a good few hundred years before his birth. And just to further rub salt in my wounds...
Oh yeah, that's right. Warhammer The Old World is a prequel, kind of. Forgot about that.
Total Warhammer keeps crashing on me. I changed the mod list, updated and reinstalled some mods, and then just turned them all off. Still randomly crashes when I attack a settlement. Although random might not quite be the word, because it'll repeatedly crash on the same settlement when I reload. So unfortunately, properly getting footage or even just the damn screenshots like I somehow managed to squeeze into a video about gameplay without feeling any amount of shame isn't gonna happen.
That's interesting. I mean, I haven't run into that bug just yet, but I do recall when I was streaming Total War Warhammer with Kiwi, there were some people in chat who were having issues with the game just crashing randomly. Maybe it's the new update, but I mean, it's been a while since this video came out, so there's probably been a hotfix by now. I don't know. I guess Total War is just kind of a buggy game sometimes.
TLDR though, with him moving to Cathay, you can now truly blast Fortunate's son while you bombard everyone with a cheap cast of Searing Doom from his Pegasus. Especially if you install the Immortal Empire's Expanded mod, which adds Koresh. Rather disappointing, both because I'm losing out on a chance to play Total Warhammer for my job, and because I'd written the entire script for Do or Don't Total War Gelt. It was another 4 pages, so my apologies for that. I'll have that fixed up for next time I do one of these. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You were the gold turning into lead trick to my Gelt, a crucial part in me BSing my way through all these uploads. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Oh, by the way, that Alka-Hess thing? It's actually a real thing in both Warhammer and at one point theorized to be in real life. It's the universal solvent that can dissolve anything without destroying or altering its fundamental components, most importantly gold. In Warhammer Fantasy Tabletop, Gelt carries a vial of it around that he throws at people. This man carries a vial of acid around and breaks it off on people who bother him. I love him.
What a petty guy.